Connor Walsh emerged from behind the equipment cabinet with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting his movements on lacrosse fields. His usual confident smile had been replaced by something hungrier, more focused. Brooke followed, close behind, her phone already recording, while Derek positioned himself near the door like a bouncer controlling access to an exclusive club. The morning light caught the small tube in Connor's hand, and Mason felt his stomach drop as he recognized the industrial strength adhesive from the art department. "Morning, Carter," Connor said, his voice carrying the false friendliness that preceded his worst cruelties. "Heard you've been working real hard on your little experiments. Thought maybe it was time you experienced some hands-on chemistry of your own." He held up the tube of super glue, squeezing a small amount onto his fingertip. "This stuff bonds in seconds. Creates an irreversible molecular connection. Bet you'd find that fascinating." Mason's mind raced through possibilities and escape. Roots with the systematic thinking his father had taught him during their camping trips in the Rockies. Sergeant Carter had been more than a soldier. He had been a survival instructor who understood that preparation and clear thinking were the difference between life and death in hostile environments. "Think 3 moves ahead," he used to say during their weekend expeditions. "Your opponent is only considering his next action. That's your advantage." Brooke positioned herself for the perfect camera angle, her expression bright with anticipation. "This is going to be epic content," she whispered, adjusting the lighting on her phone. "Quiet kid gets his eyes glued shut. The humiliation will be legendary." Her followers had been demanding more extreme content, and the algorithm rewarded engagement regardless of the human cost. She had already composed the caption in her mind, complete with trending hashtags and emotional manipulation designed to maximize shares. Derek cracked his knuckles with the satisfaction of someone who rarely needed to use violence, but enjoyed the option. "Just hold still, Carter. Make this easy on yourself. Fighting will only make it worse." His construction worker father had taught him that intimidation was often more effective than actual force. But Derek secretly hoped Mason would resist. The opportunity to demonstrate his physical dominance in front of Connor and Brooke was too appealing to ignore. Connor advanced slowly, savoring the moment. "You know what your problem is, Carter. You think you're better than everyone else with your perfect grades and your tragic backstory. Poor little orphan boy, so smart and special." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But you're nothing. Your father was nothing. And after this, everyone will know exactly what you are." The mention of his father triggered something deep and primal in Mason's chest. The dog tag seemed to grow heavier against his skin, and for a moment he could hear Robert Carter's voice from their last conversation. Before deployment. "Son, there are people in this world who mistake kindness for weakness. When you meet them, and you will, remember that a man's worth isn't measured by how much abuse he can endure. Sometimes the most moral thing you can do is show someone the consequences of their choices." Connor lunged forward with the confidence of someone who had never faced real resistance, expecting Mason to cower or plead for mercy. Instead, Mason moved with fluid precision that seemed to slow time itself. His father had taught him that combat was about geometry and physics, not anger or aggression. Weight distribution, leverage points, momentum transfer. Connor's charge became his weakness as Mason stepped aside and redirected the larger boys. Energy, sending him crashing into the lab table with enough force to scatter glassware across the floor. Derek's shock lasted exactly 2 seconds before his protective instincts kicked in. He rushed forward with the lumbering determination of someone accustomed to overwhelming opponents through size and aggression. Mason waited until the last possible moment before dropping low and sweeping Derek's legs, using the bigger boy's momentum to send him tumbling into a cabinet full of chemical supplies. The crash echoed through the empty hallway like thunder, and Derek found himself tangled in a web of rubber tubing and broken equipment. Brooke had stopped recording. her phone shaking in her trembling hands as she watched two of the toughest guys in school, neutralized by someone she had dismissed as a harmless victim. Her perfectly curated world of social media dominance suddenly felt fragile and artificial. The narrative she had built around Mason being weak and pathetic crumbled in real time, leaving her struggling to process what she had witnessed. Connor struggled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow where he had struck the table edge. His carefully maintained image of effortless superiority lay in pieces around him, like the shattered beakers scattered across the floor. "You're dead, Carter," he spat, but there was something hollow in his threat now, an uncertainty that hadn't existed before. Mason stood among the wreckage, breathing steadily, his hands loose at his sides. The violence had felt surprisingly natural, muscle memory awakening from countless hours spent learning survival skills in the Colorado wilderness. His father had insisted that every soldier's child should know how to defend themselves, not through aggression but through understanding the fundamental principles of combat and control. "Touch me again," Mason said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire lab. "And I'll show you what my father really taught me." The dog tags caught the morning light as they swayed against his chest, and for the first time since Sergeant Carter's funeral, Mason felt the full weight of his legacy. Picture this. A 17-year-old boy named Mason Carter sits alone in the chemistry lab of Fairfield High School, methodically mixing compounds with the precision of someone who understands that small mistakes can have explosive consequences. His fingers absently touch the military dog tags hanging beneath his flannel shirt, two pieces of stamped metal that represent everything he has left of Sergeant Robert Carter, the father who died in a training accident 3 years ago. Mason doesn't know it yet, but those tags hold secrets that powerful people would kill to keep buried. He's about to learn that sometimes the quietest students carry the deadliest skills, and when bullies push too far, they unleash a storm of retribution that will shatter lives and expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of corporate America. What happens next will leave you questioning everything you think you know about the underdog's revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mason Carter had always been good at being invisible. In the crowded hallways of Fairfield High School, nestled in the mountain town of Pine Ridge, Colorado, he moved like a shadow among the clusters of students. His dark brown hair fell across his eyes, and his worn flannel shirts hung loose on his lean frame. While other juniors worried about homecoming dates and college applications, Mason spent his free time in the chemistry lab, where the precise nature of molecular reactions made more sense than the chaotic social hierarchy that governed teenage life. The dog tags had been his constant companion since the funeral. Sergeant Robert Carter had worn them through 2 tours overseas before returning to train new recruits at Fort Carson. The official report called it a training accident, a miscalculation, during a live-fire exercise that claimed the life of a decorated soldier. Mason's mother had pressed the tags into his palm at the graveside service, her voice barely a whisper. "He wanted you to have these. Said they'd keep you safe." The weight of the metal against his chest was both comfort and burden, a reminder of the man who had taught him that strength didn't always mean raising your voice. Fairfield High reflected the mountain community it served, where old Colorado families mixed with newcomers drawn by tech jobs and scenic beauty. The school's brick facade and sprawling campus accommodated just over 800 students, enough to create distinct social territories, but small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. Mason occupied the space between groups, neither popular nor completely outcast, existing in a careful neutrality that kept him off most people's radar. Most people, but not all. Connor Walsh commanded attention the way natural leaders do, with an easy smile that masked calculating eyes and the kind of athletic build that made teachers remember him fondly years later. As captain of the lacrosse team and son of one of Pine Ridge's most prominent families, Connor moved through the halls with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. His girlfriend, Brooke Mitchell, amplified his influence through her mastery of social media, where her perfectly curated posts attracted thousands of followers who hung on her every manufactured moment. Derek Barnes completed their triangle of power, a mountain of muscle whose family had run a successful construction business for 3 generations. Where Connor led with charm and Brooke with manipulation, Derek provided the physical presence that made their authority unquestionable. For reasons Mason couldn't fully understand, this trio had marked him as their target during sophomore year. It started small, shoulder checks in the hallway, snide comments about his second-hand clothes, the occasional theft of homework or lab reports. Mason endured it with the same stoic patience his father had taught him, believing that drawing attention would only make things worse. He was wrong about that, but he wouldn't realize it until much later. The chemistry lab had become Mason's sanctuary, a place where Mr. Peterson's strict rules about safety and precision created an environment the bullies rarely invaded. Here, surrounded by beakers and Bunsen burners, Mason could lose himself in the elegant dance of elements combining and separating, creating new compounds through careful measurement and timing. His aptitude for chemistry had earned him special privileges, including access to the lab during lunch periods and after school. It was during one of these solitary sessions that he first noticed Connor watching him through the glass partition, a predatory smile playing across his features. What Mason didn't know was that his isolation wasn't accidental. Dr. Patricia Walsh, Connor's mother and a senior researcher at Pharmacore Industries, had been monitoring the Carter family for 3 years. The pharmaceutical giant maintained extensive operations throughout Colorado, from research facilities in the mountains to manufacturing plants in Denver. Dr. Walsh's position gave her access to personnel files and background information that painted a troubling picture. Robert Carter's death hadn't been an accident, and his son's quiet intelligence made him a potential threat to secrets worth billions of dollars. The instructions to Connor had been subtle but clear. Keep Mason isolated, distracted, and under observation. Make sure he never had the opportunity to examine his father's belongings too closely or ask uncomfortable questions about the circumstances of Sergeant Carter's death. Connor had embraced the assignment with enthusiasm, viewing it as an opportunity to flex his social dominance while serving his mother's mysterious corporate interests. As autumn deepened in Pine Ridge and the first snow dusted the peaks surrounding the valley, the campaign against Mason intensified. Connor's attacks became more personal, targeting not just Mason's appearance or social status, but the memory of his father. Brooke documented these encounters on her phone, creating a digital record of humiliation that she threatened to share with the entire school. Derek's physical intimidation grew bolder, cornering Mason in empty hallways and stairwells, where no teachers could intervene. Through it all, Mason remained silent, his fingers unconsciously touching the dog tags beneath his shirt whenever the pressure became too much to bear. The attack came on a Tuesday morning when the November wind carried the promise of heavy snow down from the peaks. Mason had arrived early to finish a lab report, the empty hallways echoing with the hollow sound of his footsteps on polished linoleum. He preferred these quiet moments before the chaos of 800 students transformed Fairfield High into a battleground of adolescent drama and territorial disputes. The chemistry lab felt particularly peaceful, morning sunlight streaming through tall windows and casting geometric patterns across the blacktop tables. Mason was carefully documenting his observations about oxidation reactions when he heard the soft whisper of sneakers on tile behind him. He didn't turn around immediately, assuming it was Mr. Peterson arriving early to prepare for first period. The realization that something was wrong crept over him slowly, the way cold seeps through inadequate clothing. The footsteps were too light for the heavy-set chemistry teacher, And there was something predatory in their rhythm that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mr. Peterson's voice echoed from the hallway, drawn by the sound of breaking glass and overturned furniture. "What's going on in there?" His footsteps approached with the urgency of someone who had spent decades dealing with teenage crises. Connor's mind raced as he weighed his options. Explaining the super glue and the planned assault would raise questions he couldn't answer, particularly about why he had targeted Mason with such specific cruelty. His mother's instructions had been clear about maintaining plausible deniability, and this situation had spiraled far beyond anything she had anticipated. "Lab accident," Connor called out, wiping blood from his forehead with his sleeve. "Knocked over some equipment. Mason was helping us clean up." The lie came easily, polished by years of talking his way out of trouble, but Mason's steady gaze made it feel inadequate. Brooke deleted the video file from her phone with shaking fingers, her social media instincts finally overridden by self-preservation. The footage would have destroyed Connor and Derek's reputations while revealing her own complicity in what could have been assault charges. Derek hauled himself upright, chemical residue staining his leather jacket and his pride thoroughly demolished. He had built his identity around physical dominance, and watching Mason dismantle both him and Connor with surgical precision left him questioning everything he thought he knew about power and strength. As Mr. Peterson entered the lab, surveying the damage with experienced eyes that had seen every variety of teenage disaster, Mason felt something shift inside him. The quiet acceptance that had defined his high school experience was gone, replaced by a clarity that felt both liberating and dangerous. The dog tags pressed against his chest with new significance, no longer just a reminder of loss, but a symbol of inheritance. He didn't know yet that the attack had been orchestrated, that Connor's cruelty served a larger purpose, or that his father's death was connected to secrets worth killing for. But as he met Connor's hostile glare across the destroyed laboratory, Mason Carter began to understand that his days of invisibility were over. The principal's office at Fairfield High had the institutional smell of old carpet and industrial disinfectant that seemed to permeate every administrative building Mason had ever entered. Principal Davies sat behind her mahogany desk like a judge preparing to deliver sentence, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized the severity of her expression. The destroyed chemistry lab had required a full cleanup crew and nearly $3,000 in replacement equipment, money the school district could ill afford during budget cuts that had already eliminated the art program and reduced library hours. Mason sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair across from her, his hands folded in his lap while Connor occupied the identical seat to his right. Derek had been sent to the nurse's office for the chemical burns on his arms, while Brooke waited in the outer office, her parents already en route from their downtown law firm. The morning sun streamed through Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the disciplinary hearing that would reshape the trajectory of Mason's senior year. "Mr. Carter," Principal Davies began, her voice carrying the weary authority of someone who had mediated countless teenage conflicts, "this is the most serious incident we've had this semester. Destruction of school property, potential assault charges, and according to Mr. Walsh, unprovoked violence against students who were simply trying to help with a chemistry experiment." She glanced at the incident report that Mr. Peterson had filed, his careful handwriting documenting the scene he had discovered. Connor had perfected his wounded innocent act during the hour-long investigation, complete with butterfly bandages over his eyebrow cut and a performance worthy of community theater. "I was just trying to show Mason how the adhesive worked for our group project," he explained, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We've had our differences, sure, but I never expected him to attack us like that. Derek might have permanent scarring on his arms." The lie settled in the room like toxic gas, invisible but poisonous to everything it touched. Mason felt the familiar weight of injustice pressing down on his shoulders, the same helpless frustration he had experienced watching his father's military career reduced to a single paragraph in the Fort Carson newsletter. Official narratives had a way of erasing truth, replacing complex reality with simplified versions that served institutional needs. The security cameras in the hallway show you entering the lab before school hours, Principal Davies continued, consulting her notes with the methodical precision of someone building an airtight case. Mr. Peterson confirms that you had permission to use the laboratory, but that permission didn't extend to conducting unauthorized experiments with dangerous substances or engaging in physical altercations with other students. Mason recognized the trap closing around him with the clarity his father had taught him to maintain under pressure. Speaking the truth would require explaining Connor's planned assault, which would sound like the desperate fabrication of someone trying to avoid responsibility. The super glue tube had disappeared during the chaos, probably pocketed by Derek or dropped into a trash can before Mr. Peterson's arrival. Without physical evidence or witnesses willing to contradict Connor's version of events, Mason's word carried little weight against the star athlete's reputation. "I defend myself when attacked," Mason said simply, meeting Principal Davies' gaze without flinching. "Everything else is details." The suspension lasted 3 days, officially for destruction of school property and violation of laboratory safety protocols. Unofficially, everyone understood that Mason Carter had crossed an invisible line by refusing to accept his designated role as victim. The story spread through Fairfield High with the velocity of digital gossip, transforming with each retelling until Mason became either a dangerous psychopath or an avenging hero, depending on the narrator's perspective and social allegiances. Mason's mother, Sarah Carter, picked him up from school with the resigned expression of someone who had received too many unexpected phone calls from institutions. Her nursing shifts at Pine Ridge General Hospital had already been extended to cover staffing shortages, and now she faced the additional burden of finding childcare for her suspended son. The drive home passed in silence, mountain scenery blurring past the windows of their aging Honda Civic while Sarah processed the gap between the quiet boy she knew and the young man who had apparently hospitalized 2 classmates. "Your father worried this might happen," she finally said as they pulled into the gravel driveway of their modest ranch house. "He said you had too much of his intensity, too much of his need to fight back when cornered. I hoped the mountains would calm that part of you, but maybe some things are just inherited." The house felt different during school hours, quieter but also more focused, as if the absence of teenage energy allowed the building itself to breathe more deeply. Mason retreated to his bedroom, a small space dominated by bookshelves and a desk where he completed homework assignments with the same methodical precision he applied to chemistry experiments. The walls displayed no posters or decorations, just a single framed photograph of Sergeant Robert Carter in dress uniform, his expression serious but kind beneath the military bearing. Mason had examined the dog tags countless times since the funeral, running his fingers over the stamped metal and memorizing every detail of his father's service information. The tags were standard military issue, identical to millions of others worn by service members around the world. Name, social security number, blood type, religious preference. Nothing that would suggest hidden significance or secret purposes. Yet his mother's words echoed in his memory with new urgency. "He wanted you to have these. Said they'd keep you safe." The suspension provided Mason with something he rarely had during the school year: uninterrupted time to think. He sat on his bed with the dog tags spread across his palm, studying them with the analytical mindset that made him excel in chemistry class. Metal composition, manufacturing marks, wear patterns. Everything appeared exactly as expected for tags. Worn by an active duty sergeant with 12 years of service. Almost everything. The edge of the second tag felt slightly thicker than standard specifications, A barely perceptible difference that could have been explained by manufacturing variation or accumulated damage. Mason held it up to his desk lamp, angling the metal to catch the light at different positions. There, along the rim where the stamping ended, a hairline seam that shouldn't exist on solid metal construction. His father had been an electronics specialist before becoming a training instructor, skilled in the miniaturization technology that allowed modern military equipment to function in hostile environments. Sergeant Carter understood that valuable information could be hidden in the most mundane objects, disguised as routine equipment that would never attract suspicious attention. Mason remembered weekend camping trips where his father had demonstrated survival techniques, including methods for concealing emergency supplies and everyday items. The seam yielded to careful pressure from a paper clip, revealing a cavity precisely machined into the tag's interior. Nestled inside was a micro SD card, smaller than a fingernail, its black surface unremarkable except for the significance his father had placed on its concealment. Mason held the tiny device up to the light, wondering what information had been important enough to hide in such an elaborate fashion. His laptop booted slowly, the older model struggling with software updates and accumulated digital debris. Mason inserted the micro SD card into his computer's reader slot, half expecting nothing to happen. Instead, a password prompt appeared, followed by a directory of encrypted files with cryptic names that meant nothing to his civilian understanding. Document after document requiring access codes he didn't possess, protected by military grade security protocols designed to resist unauthorized intrusion. Frustration mounted as Mason clicked through folder after folder of inaccessible information. His father had clearly intended for him to discover the hidden card, but without the proper credentials, the files might as well have been written in an unknown language. Hours passed as he attempted various combinations of significant dates, family names, and military terminology, each failed attempt adding to his growing certainty that important answers lay just beyond his reach. The breakthrough came when Mason remembered his father's emphasis on attention to detail, the military precision that extended to every aspect of Sergeant Carter's life. The dog tags themselves contained all the information necessary to unlock their hidden contents. Service number, combined with Mason's birth date and his mother's maiden name, created the alphanumeric sequence that opened the first encrypted folder. What he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about his father's death and his own place in the world. Audio files recorded in his father's voice, speaking with the urgency of someone who knew his time was running out. Documents detailing illegal human experimentation conducted by PharmaCorp Industries on military personnel without their knowledge or consent. Financial records showing payments to commanding officers who facilitated access to troops for unauthorized drug trials. His father's voice filled the quiet bedroom, calm but determined as he explained the conspiracy he had uncovered. If you're hearing this, son, it means they got to me before I could expose what these people are doing. PharmaCorp has been using soldiers as test subjects for experimental compounds, telling them they're receiving routine vaccinations while actually dosing them with untested pharmaceuticals. Some of the compounds cause permanent neurological damage. Others have killed people. Mason sat frozen as the recording continued, his father's words painting a picture of corporate malfeasance that reached into the highest levels of military command. Sergeant Carter had discovered the program by accident when several soldiers in his training unit began exhibiting symptoms consistent with chemical poisoning. His investigation had uncovered a network of corruption involving PharmaCorp executives, military contractors, and government officials who viewed enlisted personnel as expendable research subjects. I've copied everything I could find, his father's voice continued from beyond the grave. Financial records, medical data, communications between PharmaCorp executives and their military contacts. It's all here, son. Enough to bring down the entire operation and get justice for the soldiers they've murdered. But I need you to be smart about this. These people have resources and connections I can't fight alone. Find someone you trust, someone with the authority and integrity to handle this information properly." The recording ended with his father's final words, spoken with the love and pride that had defined their relationship. "I'm sorry to leave this burden with you, Mason, but I know you're strong enough to finish what I started. Your mother and I raised you to understand the difference between right and wrong, and to have the courage to act on that understanding. Don't let these people win. Don't let the soldiers they've killed die for nothing." Mason sat in the growing darkness of his bedroom, the dog tags heavy in his hands, and the weight of his father's legacy settling across his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready to carry. The mountains outside Pine Ridge held their secrets. Well, ancient granite peaks that had witnessed countless human dramas unfold in the valleys below. Mason stood at his bedroom window watching the evening light fade behind the Continental Divide, his father's revelations churning in his mind like the chemical reactions he studied in AP chemistry. The micro SD card lay on his desk beside his laptop, its innocent appearance masking the explosive information contained within its memory banks. Every instinct told him that knowledge this dangerous required careful handling. But the 16-year-old part of his brain wanted immediate action, swift justice for the soldiers who had died and the father who had been silenced. His phone buzzed with a text from his older brother Jake, whose college dormitory at Colorado State University was only 90 minutes away by car. Jake had inherited their father's build and intensity, but channeled it into academic pursuits rather than military service, studying computer engineering with the same methodical approach that had made Sergeant Carter an exceptional soldier. The message was brief but perfectly timed. "Heard about the school thing. Coming home Friday. We need to talk." Mason had always been closer to Jake than to most people his own age, their 4-year gap creating a mentorship dynamic that felt natural given their family's emphasis on looking out for each other. Jake possessed the technical skills to properly analyze the encrypted files, but more importantly, he had the emotional distance to help Mason think through the implications without being overwhelmed by grief or anger. Their father had trained both boys to approach complex problems systematically, breaking overwhelming challenges into manageable components that could be addressed through careful planning and execution. The evening stretched ahead with the peculiar emptiness that suspension created. Hours normally filled with homework and routine, suddenly available for contemplation and research. Mason's mother worked double shifts at the hospital, her nursing supervisor understanding the financial pressures faced by military widows in expensive mountain communities. The house felt larger in her absence, every creak and settling sound amplified by solitude and the weight of secrets that demanded action. Mason returned to his laptop, methodically working through the files his father had assembled with the patience of someone accustomed to detailed investigation. Financial records showed regular payments from PharmaCorp subsidiaries to military personnel, amounts large enough to suggest corruption but structured to avoid triggering automatic oversight systems. Medical reports documented mysterious illnesses among soldiers who had participated in routine vaccination programs, symptoms that aligned with known side effects of experimental psychoactive compounds. The most damning evidence came in the form of recorded phone conversations between Dr. Victoria Sterling, PharmaCorp's chief executive officer, and Colonel James Morrison, the commanding officer responsible for training operations at Fort Carson. Sterling's voice carried the cold calculation of someone who viewed human lives as statistical data points, acceptable losses in pursuit of pharmaceutical breakthroughs that could generate billions in revenue. The latest batch showed promising results, Sterling explained during a conversation dated 2 weeks before Sergeant Carter's death. Cognitive enhancement without the motor function impairment we observed in previous trials. We'll need another control group of at least 50 subjects to validate the data before moving to clinical trials. Colonel Morrison's response revealed the bureaucratic machinery that enabled such atrocities. "I can arrange that." Training rotations provide natural cover for expanded vaccination protocols. The soldiers never question routine medical procedures, especially when presented as readiness requirements for deployment. Mason paused the recording, his hands trembling with rage as he processed the casual tone both speakers used when discussing human experimentation. These weren't comic book villains reveling in evil. They were professionals treating murder as a business optimization problem. The banality of their corruption made it somehow more horrifying than cartoonish malevolence would have been. His father's investigation had uncovered the selection criteria used for choosing test subjects. Young soldiers with limited family connections, personnel from rural backgrounds unlikely to have resources for challenging military medical decisions, and individuals whose questioning of authority could be dismissed as disciplinary problems rather than legitimate concerns. Sergeant Carter had realized that his own curiosity about the unusual illness patterns among his trainees had marked him as a threat requiring elimination. The official accident report painted a picture of routine training exercise gone wrong. A mechanical failure during live-fire maneuvers that had claimed the life of an experienced instructor. Mason read through the document with new understanding, recognizing the careful language that obscured rather than explained the circumstances of his father's death. Key witnesses had been transferred to other installations before completing their statements. Equipment supposedly involved in the accident had been destroyed rather than preserved for investigation. The entire narrative felt constructed rather than discovered. Mason's phone rang, startling him from his absorbed reading. Jake's name appeared on the caller ID, and Mason answered with relief at hearing a familiar voice in the midst of overwhelming revelations. "Mom told me what happened at school," Jake said without preamble. "Fighting isn't like you, especially not the kind that puts people in the hospital. Want to tell me what really went down?" The question opened floodgates that Mason hadn't realized were straining against accumulated pressure. He found himself explaining not just the confrontation in the chemistry lab, but the months of escalating harassment that had preceded it, the systematic campaign of humiliation that Connor and his friends had waged with increasing boldness. Jake listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped Mason organize his thoughts and recognize patterns he had missed while living through the harassment. "Sounds like they were testing your breaking point," Jake observed when Mason finished his account. "Professional bullies usually get bored and move on to easier targets when they don't get the reaction they want. These guys kept escalating even when you didn't respond. That suggests they had specific reasons for targeting you rather than just random teenage cruelty." The insight crystallized suspicions that had been forming in Mason's subconscious mind throughout the investigation. Connor's attacks had been too persistent, too focused on undermining Mason's confidence and isolating him from potential allies. The planned assault with industrial adhesive represented a level of malicious planning that went beyond typical bullying behavior, suggesting external motivation rather than simple adolescent territorialism. "Jake," Mason said carefully, testing the trust that had always existed between them, "what would you say if I told you Dad's death wasn't an accident?" The silence stretched long enough for Mason to wonder if the call had been dropped, but finally Jake's voice returned with the measured tone of someone processing unexpected information. "I'd say that's a serious accusation that would require serious evidence. I'd also say that I've wondered about some inconsistencies in the official reports ever since the funeral." "Why?" Mason took a deep breath and began explaining his discovery of the hidden micro-SD card, the encrypted files, and the conspiracy his father had uncovered before his death. Jake's background in computer engineering allowed him to understand the technical aspects of the evidence, while his emotional connection to their father provided the motivation to take Mason's claims seriously rather than dismissing them as grief-induced. "Paranoia. Send me copies of everything," Jake said when Mason finished his explanation. I'll drive down tomorrow instead of waiting for Friday. This is too important to handle over the phone. And if you're right about the scope of this conspiracy, you're probably in more danger than you realize." The conversation ended with Mason feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. Sharing the burden of his father's secrets made them feel more manageable, but it also made them more real. Jake's validation that the evidence warranted serious. Investigation confirmed that Mason wasn't imagining connections or seeing patterns that didn't exist. PharmaCorp had killed Sergeant Carter to protect their illegal research program, and now his son possessed the evidence necessary to expose their crimes. Mason spent the rest of the evening copying files to secure cloud storage and creating multiple backup copies of the most important documents. His father's training in operational security had emphasized redundancy and preparation for worst-case scenarios. If PharmaCorp was willing to kill an experienced soldier to protect their secrets, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a teenage witness who posed a similar threat. As midnight approached, Mason realized that sleep would be impossible with his mind racing through implications and possibilities. He sat at his desk, studying the photograph of his father in dress uniform, drawing strength from Sergeant Carter's steady gaze and determined expression. The path ahead would require courage Mason wasn't sure he possessed, but the alternative meant allowing his father's killers to continue profiting from the suffering they inflicted on others. The dog tags caught the lamplight as Mason held them once more, their weight now representing not just memory, but mission. Tomorrow Jake would arrive with technical expertise and emotional support. Together they would begin the dangerous work of seeking justice for crimes that powerful people had assumed would remain forever hidden in the shadow of the Colorado mountains. Jake Carter arrived at the family ranch house before dawn on Thursday morning, his Jeep Cherokee grinding up the gravel driveway with the purposeful urgency of someone who had driven through the night. Mason watched from his bedroom window as his older brother emerged from the vehicle, stretching muscles cramped from hours behind the wheel, while surveying the mountain landscape with eyes that reflected their father's analytical intensity. Jake had inherited Sergeant Carter's broad shoulders and methodical approach to problem-solving, but his computer engineering studies had given him tools their father never possessed for navigating the digital landscape where modern conspiracies lived and died. The brothers embraced briefly on the front porch, their greeting carrying the weight of shared grief and newfound purpose. Jake's presence immediately made the impossible task of exposing PharmaCorp's crimes feel more manageable, transforming Mason's isolated crusade into a collaborative mission that honored their father's memory while protecting future victims from corporate predators who viewed human lives as acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of pharmaceutical profits. "Show me everything," Jake said as they settled into Mason's bedroom, the cramped space suddenly feeling like a command center where justice would be planned and executed. Mason's laptop displayed the encrypted files with their devastating evidence of human experimentation, financial corruption, and coordinated murder disguised as military accidents. Jake studied each document with the focused attention of someone trained to identify patterns in complex data sets, his engineering background allowing him to appreciate both the technical sophistication of their father's investigation and the vulnerabilities that could be exploited to bring down the entire conspiracy. The financial records painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached far beyond PharmaCorp's executive leadership. Military contractors, government oversight officials, and medical personnel had all received regular payments designed to facilitate access to unwitting test subjects, while ensuring that inconvenient questions never reached investigators with the key authority to shut down the illegal research program. Jake's analysis revealed payment patterns that suggested the conspiracy had been operating for at least 7 years, claiming dozens of victims whose deaths had been attributed to training accidents, equipment failures, and mysterious illnesses that military medical personnel were instructed to treat as routine occupational hazards. "This is bigger than we initially thought," Jake said, his voice carrying the grim satisfaction of someone who understood the scope of the challenge they faced. PharmaCorp wasn't just experimenting on individual soldiers. They were running a systematic program designed to test multiple compounds on large populations while maintaining plausible deniability through distributed responsibility and compartmentalized knowledge. Dad stumbled onto something that could destroy the company and land dozens of people in federal prison. Mason felt a chill of recognition as Jake explained the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy. The harassment campaign at Fairfield High suddenly made sense within this larger context. If PharmaCorp had been monitoring the Carter family since Sergeant Carter's death, they would have known about Mason's intelligence and his potential to uncover the truth about his father's investigation. The systematic bullying he had endured wasn't random teenage cruelty, but a calculated effort to keep him isolated, distracted, and emotionally destabilized. The realization led to another, more disturbing possibility. Connor Walsh's mother worked in pharmaceutical research, a detail Mason had absorbed without considering its significance until now. A quick internet search revealed that Dr. Patricia Walsh held a senior position at PharmaCorp Industries, specializing in neurological drug development and clinical trial management. Her LinkedIn profile listed expertise in military medical partnerships and government contract administration, qualifications that would have made her invaluable to a conspiracy requiring coordination between corporate researchers and military personnel. Connor's attacks weren't just bullying, Mason said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. His mother was using him to monitor me, to make sure I never had the time or emotional stability to examine Dad's belongings too closely. The whole campaign was designed to keep me focused on survival rather than investigation. Jake's expression darkened as he processed the implications of his brother's discovery. Which means they know you found something, or they suspect you did. The timing of that assault in the chemistry lab wasn't coincidental. They were probably planning to escalate to physical harm if the psychological pressure didn't work. The thought of Connor Walsh serving as an unwitting agent in his father's conspiracy felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than years of harassment and humiliation. Mason had endured the bullying as random cruelty, finding strength in the belief that his suffering had no larger purpose beyond satisfying teenage sadism. Learning that every insult, every humiliation, every moment of isolation had been orchestrated by his father's killers transformed his anger into something colder and more focused. Jake spent the morning analyzing the encrypted files with software, tools he had developed for his graduate research, cross-referencing financial records with personnel databases and military deployment schedules. The data revealed a pattern of suspicious deaths among soldiers who had participated in PharmaCorp's vaccination programs, fatalities that had been distributed across multiple military installations to avoid triggering oversight investigations. Each death had been accompanied by routine paperwork attributing the loss to training accidents, equipment failures, or pre-existing medical conditions that couldn't be traced to experimental pharmaceutical exposure. We need to find someone in a position of authority who can act on this information, Jake said, his voice reflecting the urgency of their situation. Dad was killed because he tried to work within military channels that had been compromised by PharmaCorp's corruption. We need to find someone outside their sphere of influence, someone with the resources and integrity to handle this evidence properly. The answer came in the form of Elena Rodriguez, an investigative journalist whose exposes of corporate malfeasance had earned her a Pulitzer Prize and the hatred of every pharmaceutical executive in America. Her articles for the Denver Tribune had consistently challenged the pharmaceutical industry's claims about drug safety and clinical trial protocols, using leaked documents and whistleblower testimony to reveal patterns of corruption that government regulators had failed to identify. Elena's reputation for protecting sources and her track record of successful investigations made her the ideal ally for bringing PharmaCorp's crimes into public view. Mason found Elena's contact information through the Tribune's website and composed an email that balanced urgency with credibility, explaining that he possessed evidence of illegal human experimentation conducted by a major pharmaceutical company on military personnel. He attached selected files from his father's investigation, choosing documents that demonstrated the scope of the conspiracy without revealing the most sensitive details that could endanger ongoing investigations or future prosecutions. Elena's response arrived within hours, her message brief but electric with professional interest. "This is exactly the kind of story I've been investigating for years. Can you meet tomorrow morning at my office in Denver? Bring everything you have, and don't discuss this with anyone else until we can verify the authenticity of your evidence and ensure your safety." The drive to Denver took Mason and Jake through mountain highways that wound past abandoned mining towns and pristine wilderness areas where their father had taught them survival skills during weekend camping expeditions. The familiar landscape felt different now, charged with the significance of their mission and the knowledge that powerful people would kill to prevent the truth from reaching public attention. Jake drove with careful attention to their surroundings, checking mirrors frequently and varying their route to detect potential surveillance that might indicate PharmaCorp had discovered their investigation. Elena Rodriguez operated from a cluttered office in downtown Denver, her workspace reflecting the controlled chaos of someone who juggled multiple complex investigations while maintaining the detailed documentation necessary for bulletproof journalism. File cabinets lined the walls, their contents representing years of accumulated evidence against corporate wrongdoing that had been carefully verified and cross-referenced with independent sources. Elena herself appeared younger than her reputation suggested, her energy and intensity suggesting someone driven by genuine passion for uncovering truth rather than career advancement or personal recognition. "Your father was a remarkable man," Elena said after reviewing the encrypted files with the systematic attention of someone trained to identify authentic evidence amid sophisticated fabrications. "This investigation represents months of careful work, and the quality of his documentation suggests he understood the legal requirements for building a prosecutable case against a major corporation. He was preparing for war against an enemy with unlimited resources and political connections." Elena's analysis confirmed Jake's assessment of the conspiracy's scope and sophistication. PharmaCorp's illegal research program represented a criminal enterprise that had generated billions in revenue while claiming dozens of lives, protected by a network of corruption that reached into military leadership, government oversight agencies, and congressional appropriations committees responsible for pharmaceutical regulation. Exposing the full extent of their crimes would require coordinated action by multiple law enforcement agencies and regulatory bodies, a process that could take years to complete while providing numerous opportunities for evidence to disappear and witnesses to be silenced. "We're going to publish this story," Elena said, her voice carrying the quiet determination of someone who had spent her career challenging powerful interests that preferred operating in shadow. "But we need to be smart about how we handle the release to maximize impact while protecting everyone involved. PharmaCorp will use every resource at their disposal to discredit this evidence and intimidate anyone associated with its publication." The plan Elena proposed combined journalistic investigation with law enforcement coordination, using media attention to prevent evidence tampering while providing federal authorities with the documentation necessary for criminal prosecutions. Elena had contacts within the FBI's white-collar crime division who specialized in pharmaceutical fraud cases, agents who could initiate formal investigations while protecting Mason and Jake from corporate retaliation through witness protection. Protocols designed for cases involving organized crime and corruption. Mason felt the weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders as Elena outlined the challenges they would face in bringing PharmaCorp to justice. His father had died trying to expose these crimes, through official military channels that had been compromised by the very conspiracy he was investigating. Now Mason carried the burden of completing that mission while navigating dangers that had killed an experienced soldier with specialized training in operational security and threat assessment. The first article appeared in the Denver Tribune. On Friday morning, Elena's byline attached to a meticulously researched expose that detailed PharmaCorp's illegal human experimentation program while protecting the identity of sources whose safety depended on anonymity. The story included financial records showing payments to military personnel, medical documentation of suspicious illnesses among soldiers who had participated in vaccination programs, and recorded conversations between PharmaCorp executives discussing the selection of test subjects for experimental drug trials. The response was immediate and devastating to PharmaCorp's corporate image. Stock prices plummeted as investors absorbed the implications of criminal charges that could result in billions of dollars in fines and civil settlements. Congressional leaders demanded immediate investigations into military medical programs, while pharmaceutical industry associations rushed to distance themselves from PharmaCorp's practices through public statements condemning human experimentation and calling for stronger oversight protocols. Dr. Victoria Sterling's arrest at her corporate headquarters made national headlines. Federal agents leading the pharmaceutical executive away in handcuffs while news crews captured footage that would define her legacy as one of the most notorious corporate criminals in American history. The charges included conspiracy to commit murder, illegal human experimentation, bribery of federal officials, and violation of international treaties governing medical research ethics. The evidence Mason's father had died protecting would now ensure that Sterling spent the remainder of her life in federal prison. Connor Walsh's world collapsed with the systematic thoroughness of a controlled demolition. His mother's arrest as a co-conspirator in PharmaCorp's illegal research program transformed him from popular athlete to social pariah overnight, his privileged position evaporating as classmates learned that his family's wealth had been built on human suffering and murder. The revelation that his bullying campaign against Mason had been orchestrated by pharmaceutical executives turned him into a symbol of corporate manipulation and teenage exploitation that followed him wherever he attempted to rebuild his shattered reputation. Brooke Mitchell and Derek Barnes faced their own reckonings as the full scope of the conspiracy became public knowledge. Their participation in Connor's harassment campaign was recontextualized as unwitting collaboration with corporate criminals. Their cruelty revealed as service to interests that viewed all of them as expendable pawns in a larger game of profit and power. The social media posts and videos they had created to humiliate Mason became evidence of their own manipulation by forces they had been too young and naive to recognize. Mason returned to Fairfield High as a transformed figure, his quiet strength now recognized as the foundation of courage rather than weakness. The hallways that had once felt like hostile territory became spaces where he moved with confidence and purpose, his fellow students treating him with the respect reserved for someone who had confronted genuine evil and emerged victorious. Teachers, who had dismissed him as a passive victim, now saw him as a young man capable of extraordinary things when circumstances demanded heroic action. The financial settlements from PharmaCorp's bankruptcy provided Mason's family with resources that ensured his college education and his mother's financial security. But more importantly, they represented acknowledgement that Sergeant Carter's death had been a criminal act rather than a tragic accident. The military investigation that followed Elena's reporting resulted in the court-martial of several officers who had participated in the conspiracy, including Colonel Morrison, whose collaboration with pharmaceutical executives had facilitated the murder of the soldiers under his command. Mason kept his father's dog tags, but they no longer carried the weight of unfinished business and unanswered questions. Instead, they had become symbols of mission accomplished, justice served, and courage inherited across generations. The micro SD card that had contained evidence of corporate murder was now preserved in FBI evidence storage, its contents having fulfilled Sergeant Carter's final wish that his son would find the strength to complete the fight he had begun. The congressional hearings that followed PharmaCorp's collapse led to comprehensive reforms in military medical programs and pharmaceutical industry oversight, legislative changes that would protect future soldiers from becoming unwitting test subjects for corporate research programs. Mason testified before the House Armed Services Committee, his quiet voice carrying the moral authority of someone who had lost everything to corporate greed, but had found the courage to ensure that others would be spared similar suffering. Elena Rodriguez won her second Pulitzer Prize for the PharmaCorp investigation, but she credited Mason's courage and his father's sacrifice as the true sources of the story's impact. The article series had not only exposed a criminal conspiracy, but had also demonstrated the power of investigative journalism to hold powerful interests accountable when ordinary citizens provided the evidence and moral courage necessary for truth to emerge from shadow. Mason Carter entered his senior year at Fairfield High with the knowledge that he had avenged his father's death and protected countless future victims from PharmaCorp's predatory research programs. The quiet boy who had once absorbed bullying as inevitable harassment had become a young man capable of confronting the most powerful interests in corporate America and emerging victorious through intelligence, courage, and the moral clarity his father had instilled through years of patient guidance. The mountains around Pine Ridge held their secrets still, but one of the darkest had been dragged into sunlight where justice could finally be served. Mason stood at his bedroom window on the first day of his final year of high school, watching sunrise paint the Continental Divide in shades of gold and crimson while planning a future built on the foundation of courage his father had left behind. He was no longer the invisible boy who had started his junior year hoping only to survive until graduation. He was Robert Carter's son, carrying forward a legacy of integrity and courage that would guide him through whatever challenges lay ahead. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.